primary side effect of steroids is greatness. That's my old joke. I know you're thinking, what the hell is this video about? What does this have to do with all the other stuff that I've talked about? But I promise, in my mind at least, it does have a lot to do with what I've talked about on the channel, namely consistency and having proper expectations for things. Especially if you're young, you're deciding where you want to expend your passions and your energies. Having correct expectations and having your eyes open when you go into anything, that is only going to help you make good, prudent decisions. And certainly when I was young, I labored under a lot of illusions and a lot of misguided, my thoughts were misguided as to what would actually be a possible goal and what I could achieve with my goals. So I want to talk about steroids, and I want to talk about performance-enhancing drugs, and now's a great time to talk about them because the Olympics are going on. So it's a really, really good time to bring up this discussion because we have this huge international competition which is drug tested, right? And I will talk a little bit about that. So to give you a little bit of my background and what I know about this particular subject, although I don't look it right now because I'm rather pudgy, at one point in my life I was much more into fitness and bodybuilding than I am now. I'm actually a big fan of bodybuilding as an activity. I don't really call it a sport, I call it an activity because its competition has to do with judgment and aesthetics and things. So it's more like an art competition to me than it is it's more like an art than it is a sport. But some people classify it as a sport. So I'm a fan of bodybuilding. My workout routine when I was very intense into my fitness routine was a bodybuilding style routine is what I call it. And I did a lot of cardio as well to get very, very lean. Although I'm not lean anymore. This was mostly when I lived in Las Vegas. And so I lived in Las Vegas for a couple years. And Las Vegas is kind of like the bodybuilding capital of the world. And there's a lot of bodybuilders there. There's a lot of pros. I met a lot of pros. I ran into a lot of pros at my gym. My gym, of course, was the Gold's Gym on Flamingo, which is kind of a world famous gym. And I saw everyone there that you could probably imagine at one given time or another, including Jay Cutler, who was there often filming. But through that interaction there, and also with friends that I had who used steroids and were really into using gear, I learned a lot about the realities of that sport and just sport in general and physical activity in general, muscle building in general, that has to do with drugs and the realities of what the human body is capable of achieving. And that goes into the proper expectations. My expectations, I would say, when I got into fitness, from the time I started and decided I'm gonna be a fit guy to the time I kind of achieved my peak physique, I lost about 70 pounds. So, and I'm still about 45 pounds lighter than probably my heaviest weight, although I'm still like probably 25 pounds heavier than I ought to be. But I've lost the weight before. I can lose it again, and I know how. But it's kind of hard when you have all the obligations of a baby. Just so you guys know, go into having children with both eyes open. They are definitely a time commitment. So anyway, that's my background with that. But getting into fitness really was good for me in the long run, even though I didn't end up using the drugs. And I would tell you if I had used performance enhancing drugs to achieve anything with my physique. And I will give a slight asterisk to that I will mention later. So there's my background with that. I actually do know a little bit of what I'm talking about here with this. And I've had my eyes opened through lots of experiences out in the world. And so I want to give you my perspective on it. So the first big thing that people always talk about with steroids is, are steroids cheating? There's this idea that steroids are cheating. Well, if you were in a competition that specifically says you can't use performance-enhancing drugs and you use those performance-enhancing drugs, it is cheating. So if you are using a performance-enhancing drug and you compete in the Olympics and with a banned substance and you're caught, obviously that's not good. You've cheated. And if you don't get caught, you're still cheating. And that's really the mindset that most people have about steroids. But if we pull them out of that competitive environment and we just think about them in general, Are they cheating? A lot of people still will hold on to that idea that like steroids are cheating. Like you're cheating your way to this great physique. You're cheating your way to this and that. And I actually don't believe that's the case. Now, you guys know, if you've watched this channel, that I am a libertarian, and I do believe that people could put whatever substance they want to into their body because they own their body. It's an important part of self-ownership. You own your body. That means you can even destroy it with drugs if you want to. But if you just think about in general, here's the reality about using steroids to achieve like a physique, is that the drugs do not do the work for you. You can use the best like drug cycle in the world, but it won't do anything for you unless you are eating properly, if you have the diet to get the body that you want to have, and if you're actually doing the physical work, if you're doing whatever workout is going to generate the body that you have. And that includes anything. That also includes sport, right? Lance Armstrong didn't take GH and just win the Tour de France. He took GH and also trained insanely as well. Athletes take these performance-enhancing drugs to enhance their performance, not to substitute for performance. So the idea that steroids are like cheating, or you're lazy for using steroids or something like that, just isn't true. The reality is steroids are there to push you beyond your limits. Like, you use the drugs to go beyond what your natural limits are. And I think the drugs are the reason that we've seen an increase in human performance over the last however many decades. I actually think it's drugs and not... I like the human beings have not like magically evolved into stronger, more powerful things over the last however many decades. We haven't, because there's been no influence of that. Like, we haven't suddenly gotten more gotten magically better nutrition either. If anything, our nutrition is worse than it was however many decades ago. We have a massive obesity epidemic. We have hypernutrition is our problem. We have too much bad food. So like people. It's not like we've made massive nutrition discoveries either. We have made some nutrition discoveries. Like, nutrition has gotten better if you know what you're doing, but not enough to account for like the massive performance increase that you see. So I think most of the performance increase you see is actually drugs, and that comes to this next point, which is people love freaks. If you remember back in, I think it was like 2000-ish, maybe 1999. There was a baseball season where Mark McGwire like broke the home run record, but several people broke it as well, and one of them was Sammy Sosa. And there was like this contest, like, who's going to hit the most home runs this season? Is it going to be Mark McGwire? Is it going to be Sammy Sosa? And the whole time there was like this thing, like, are these guys on steroids? And like, I think Mark McGwire came out with this, or it came out that he used pro hormones. And if you guys don't know what pro hormones are, they're a steroid that's been bound to another like inert chemical, and your body breaks them down into steroids, so they become steroids in your body. But because they're chemically not this particular substance that's controlled by the FDA, they don't count as a steroid, which means you could like buy them at GNC or like Vitamin Shop or something like that, or order them online. So pro hormones were this big thing like 15 years ago because of like Mark McGwire. So was Mark McGwire taking steroids to hit all those home runs? Definitely he was taking steroids 100%. If you consider steroids cheating in that environment, yes, Mark McGwire is a big fat cheater. He took all the steroids, but he also trained, and he also had like a certain set of genetics that allowed him to excel in baseball as well. And I also don't think he was the only one that did it. That's the other thing, is that even though, a lot of these sports organizations ban these performance enhancing drugs, they ban steroids, there's still massive widespread use. I've had my eyes open to that repeatedly. The guys who, even if during like the time when they're being tested, even during the season or like leading up to a fight, they don't use that substance. They're using it to train in like an off season. They're using it to build up a lot of muscle going into a season. They're using different kinds of substance for different purposes, and in some cases they're using substances that haven't figured out how to test yet. And I think that was the case with Lance Armstrong in the Tour de France, was that he used human growth hormone to accelerate his recovery from workouts, and it wasn't like they hadn't they didn't have a test for it because it gets turned into insulin, IGF, insulin-like growth factor 1, which is another chemical that your body uses. And they just didn't end up having a good test for it. So he just was able to use it sort of freely and win a bunch of Tour de France's with it. But I think they stripped his titles, but they still couldn't give those titles to anyone because everybody else in the field did it too. So even though, steroids are cheating if the rules explicitly say don't use steroids, obviously that's cheating. But all the athletes do it anyway, it's massive. And if you go to the Olympics right now, and if you had the ability to actually see what these athletes were doing throughout the entire year or throughout the entire 4 years that they were working, I guarantee you the majority of them, especially if they're from any kind of rich country, are using performance-enhancing drugs of some kind. And most of the people who have gold medals in sports that require extreme physical strength, prowess, extreme physical endurance, that they've used some sort of enhancement to get where they are. And that includes Michael Phelps. And I think, I'm obviously, it's not really possible for me to back that up, to prove it. That's a feeling I have based on all the other athletes that have gotten caught and all the evidence I've had from talking to other athletes who are involved in these sports, especially with something that it's an endurance sport. There's a lot of doping that goes on. There's a lot of cheating that goes on in that respect. There's a lot of people who use those performance enhancing drugs, and I think every year people get caught for the drugs with the Olympics, and I think it's just now a contest of who can get away without getting caught, knowing which drugs will leave your system quick enough that you won't test positive on whatever test they make you do. So that's kind of what I think about the Olympics. I think the Olympics are pretty dirty, and I think the organization of the Olympics is pretty scummy as well. I think it's all about you bribe this Olympic committee to get the Olympics to your third world country in hopes that it'll bring in commerce, and it's always some kind of disaster. I guess I'm not a fan of the Olympics in general. I like the idea of them. It sounds cool as an idea, but I never seem to think that they're what they are. They're not amateur anymore. I feel like it's just a bunch of pro athletes that use drugs to get to get that edge. And it's all under the table. If it was out in the open and everyone was free to know and use and have the correct expectations about performance enhancing drugs, I don't think I'd be quite as disillusioned about it. But I still probably wouldn't watch it much because most of the sports are things I don't really enjoy watching. Hence why they're only shown every 4 years, right? We watch baseball every single year, a whole bunch, because people really like watching baseball. Same thing with football, hockey, baseball, the big sports here in the United States, as well as soccer. I know soccer's not big in the US, but it's the biggest thing everywhere else. We watch soccer all year round because it's fun to watch, and we watch it in the Olympics as well. But we don't really watch swimming all year round. That's not, I don't really ever see that on ESPN. We just kind of watch it once every 4 years because that's how much attention people have for it. I guess that's the other thing with the Olympics. But people love freaks. They love to see those records being broken at the Olympics. They love to see Michael Phelps win 20 gold medals. They love to see him break whatever world record. And they don't really want to poke and say I wonder how he did that. Is he the greatest freak since the dawn of man, or does he have this super special training regimen? What breakthrough has caused him to be this much better than everyone who came before him? And I think the probable breakthrough is that he knows how to use the drug cycle to maximize his body's output in a way that gives him that edge. And all the other athletes are amazing as well. I don't want to take away anything from them, but I'm sure that they are doing similar things to try to achieve that maximum performance. And that leads me to another point. So how common are steroids? In sports, I think they're almost universal. And I don't have a lot to back that up with other than, experience and seeing how many people get caught all the time. There was a UFC fight pretty recently where every fight, somebody on the card tested positive for steroids. And, that's a moment where you should stop and reflect and be did everyone in the sport suddenly start taking steroids, or did we just find a better way to catch them? Especially if it's athletes that weren't taking stuff in the past. I think it's probably that they're catching them better. And I remember when the UFC bought Pride. God, this was like years ago. This is like years and years and years ago. They bought Pride, and all these great athletes from Pride, like Vanderlei Silva, they were really expected to come into the UFC and make this huge splash. And we kind of saw them wither, and like we're like, what happened to these great fighters? They just didn't perform well in the UFC, and the reason was they were performing in environments where they were tested for their performance-enhancing drugs and couldn't use them leading up to the fight, which put them at a massive disadvantage to people who, might have been genetically better or might have had a better understanding of what drugs that they could use. So Vanderlei Silva in particular, like his performance, like really just didn't seem to extend, and I think it was because he wasn't able to use the steroids anymore to the extent that he was, at least when he was fighting in Japan and in the Pride competition. That's just kind of my feeling about it. So I think they're very common. I know for a fact in gyms across the country they're very, very common. A lot of guys who use steroids aren't competing in anything. They're just guys who want a really good physique. And so they're using some tests. They're using Winstrol or some other steroid to try to get lean, and that's what they're doing. Like they have their own personal goals. I've known a lot of gym rats. They all pretty much are okay with like using steroids for long periods of time or for whatever goals they happen to have, and they're not really like competitive people. So for them, is it really cheating? I think it's just their choice. And I could put cheating in another light in a minute when I talk about like cosmetic surgery, but that's the majority. I think they're very, very common. And once you have a little bit of knowledge with steroids, it's pretty easy to spot the guys at the gym who are actually on gear. And you'll be able to know fairly quick the guys at the gym who are on gear. Now, I will say that like here where I live in California now, I don't see so many of those guys anymore. When I lived in Las Vegas, it was like you knew right away if somebody was on gear, and they'd probably tell you. And they were upfront about it, and they were fine with it. So the appearance of the physique, like the cap delts, they start to get this jaw thing after a while from the GH, and just a lot of telltale signs that somebody's been using anabolic steroids is the fact that their physique looks inhuman, that you've exceeded the normal capacities of a person to build muscle. And if you go back and look at you go back and look at bodybuilders and fitness types from like the 50s or 40s and 50s, that's what a natural body looks like. It's not like shredded to the bone. It's pretty lean. There's some muscle there. A big guy back in the 40s or 50s was like 180, 190 pounds. Big guy now is 300 pounds, right? And we've had, 60 years of growth in that time. I'm a pretty big guy myself. When I'm really lean, I'm like 200 pounds. And right now I'm like 230 pounds. So I'm overweight. I'm quite overweight for my size. But if I were natural, that 200 pounds, that would be like tiny. If you were using steroids, the 200 pounds would be tiny for somebody who's over 6 feet, as I am. I'm a pretty tall guy. So you have to think of it like in those sorts of terms. If you go back to the past, I think I remember looking at like my grandfather's discharge papers from the Army Air Corps back in the 1940s, and I think his listed weight was like 165 pounds, and he's like 6'4", and he played professional basketball after he left the Army. So he was a tall guy, and he only weighed like 170. Probably weighed 170 when he was a professional athlete. That would be tiny by today's standards in the NBA. He didn't play in the NBA, by the way. He played in like a semi-pro thing, like a different organization. He wasn't an NBA player. Just so we get that out of the way. But for somebody who did that as their living, he wasn't like incredibly huge or something like that. Now, my father was actually a genetic freak, and when a lean weight for him was like 250 pounds. But he was 6'7". He was a giant, and So he actually was like a genetic freak. But the genetic freaks are really rare. And when you do see the genetic freaks, like if you were to meet my father, you'd be astounded by his size. But he wasn't a lean guy. Like he had a big barrel chest, and he always carried around a lot of fat. But he was a giant. He looked like a giant Viking. He was strong as hell. But those genetic freaks, they still use, in my opinion, they're still using substances because at the highest levels, the talent level's so high and the fitness level's so high, you'll do anything to compete. Like, you have to do it to compete. I'm not really sure to what extent in all professional sports they're used, but I think they're really, really common. You know, I just think that they're very, very common. When I see a lot of NFL players, as soon as I see them take their shirts off, I have a pretty good idea that they're using some sort of substance just based on the way their body looks. Deltoid muscles in particular, they just don't develop very well on their own. If you're totally natty, you're just not going to get those huge capped deltoids. You need some sort of other substance, and not usually testosterone either. You need I think Trembolone is the big common one that bodybuilders use, and I don't know if NFL players use them or what I don't know what their drugs are using. I know more about bodybuilding than anything else. But if you see those big cap delts, that means that there's some other drug there that's binding with those receptors a little bit more efficiently than your natural testosterone will be. And if you just think about this, if you stop and think about it for a minute, like, why doesn't our body naturally look like the Hulk? Like, why can't we just lift and look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Lee Haney or Jay Cutler or Phil Heath or one of these guys? Like, why don't our bodies look like that? And the reason is this body was designed for something that wasn't that. Our body was designed, evolved to suit the nature that those people that our ancient forebears actually lived in. So if you think about ancient Africans, they didn't live in an environment where carrying around 100 pounds of muscle would benefit you. You needed to be lean, you needed to be fast. The more muscle you carried around, the more you had to eat, right? We think of Neanderthals as being quite large because they lived in like a different environment, but they still didn't carry around excess muscle. It's not worthwhile for your body to carry around more muscle than you need to do the tasks that are necessary for survival. So our body systems are designed to not keep on that much muscle mass. In order to have that huge amount of muscle mass, you have to use a drug in most cases to have that. And especially if you're a normal guy with normal genetics and you're not one of these genetic freaks, it's going to be that much harder to look like them. And that goes back to those expectations. Most people have this expectation that if they work hard, they can look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that is not a correct expectation. He admitted to using steroids back in the 70s. Everybody used Dianabol and whatever else to get big and ripped like that. That's just reality. So it's not good to have that expectation that it's like, man, if I just work hard and go to the gym and I lift 2 hours a day, then I'm gonna get super big and get super ripped. I can get to that Phil Heath, Kai Green level. It's like, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. You gotta have all the chemicals in order to do that. The other thing I want to talk about is just the nature of enhancement, the nature of performance enhancement, not just for sports but for everything. Because I don't think that there's a lot of consistency when it comes to performance enhancement. A lot of people, they think steroids are really bad, or like it's the result of, they're really bad. They could be bad for you, by the way. There are health risks to steroids. I'll talk about that in a second, I guess. But, they think steroids are really bad. Steroids are very, very demonized. But people are happy to use other drugs to increase their own enhancement. Yeah, how many of you wake up in the morning and drink a cup of coffee? That's a stimulant. It's designed to make you feel more awake, more alert, to enhance your performance at work, to enhance your performance at what you're doing. How many guys, if you go to the gym, take a pre-workout? You put that no explode in the cup, and you take all the beta alanine, you take the caffeine, so you can go work out harder, right? That's a performance enhancement, and it is a drug. You're taking drugs. You're putting drugs in your body to enhance your performance. You're using performance enhancing drugs. No, you're not using anabolic steroids, but you're still attempting to enhance your performance. And then we think even wider. There's other ways of enhancing performance. Like, if you're a basketball player and you get like LASIK eye surgery to increase the quality of your vision, to make you see like 2015, is that not a performance enhancement? It's not a drug, but it's a surgery that enhances your performance. What if somebody invented a surgery that like moved your tendon of your bicep up to give it more leverage and increased your strength, right? Like you had your tendons all surgically re-altered to increase the leverage on your bones. Would that be a performance enhancement? It'd be a performance enhancement, but it wouldn't be a drug. So therefore, is it okay? There's also, athletes that live in altitude chambers, and altitude chambers are a thing that lots of endurance athletes like to use. When you live at a higher altitude, your body responds to the lower concentration of oxygen by making more red blood cells to transport the oxygen around. Then you go down to a more oxygen-rich environment around sea level, and you have this extra blood that you can use to pump even more oxygen to your body. And I could tell you for a fact, because I used to live in Las Vegas, which was like, and actually used to live a little bit above Vegas. So I lived at like 2,500 sea level, and I'd come back to Bakersfield or come back to LA, and I'd go running at sea level, and I'd feel like a god. Like I'd feel like I just couldn't get tired. I'd run 20 kilometers and get to the end of it and feel great. Whereas in Vegas, I'd run a 10K and get to the end of it and feel like I was going to die sometimes. Like it was just hard. It was much harder. And that's just a small elevation change. Imagine if you're training at like 5,000, 6,000 feet above sea level, 10,000 feet above sea level. You're going to get a lot of benefit from that. So people go and sleep in these altitude chambers where it sucks out all the air out, and then that's supposed to stimulate your body making extra red blood cells. Now that, for a lot of people, it's like, well, no, going up to a high altitude to get more red blood cells, that's not cheating. It's like, but you're enhancing your performance artificially, right? You're creating a stimulus for your body that gives you a performance edge. And then there's this line between doping and non-doping. So like what a lot of bicycle competitors would do is they would take like blood out of their body and put red blood cells back in on the day of the competition, so that their body had all this extra volume of red blood cells to pump all the oxygen. And so now they created rules where like you can't have above a certain concentration of red blood cells. Like your red blood cell count can't be above a certain line in like the Tour de France, or they assume that you've put your blood back in your body to enhance your performance. Like how weird is that when you think about it? It's very weird, right? So if you're a guy who drinks his coffee in the morning, you're engaged in the act of performance enhancement. And I'm also going to cast another shade on performance enhancement, which is cosmetic surgery. Women get cosmetic surgery all the time to get breast enhancements and those sorts of things. Is that a performance enhancement? Well, from like a sexual capital perspective, it is a performance enhancement. You are artificially creating, you're artificially making yourself look like a more sexually enticing object if you're a woman who does plastic surgery than you would be naturally. Like your natural self engages less attention than your enhanced self. And makeup does that as well, right? If you're a woman and you put on makeup, it makes you look like you're ovulating more or less, which in turn gets you more male attention, which in turn may give you benefit. And I've known women who basically who have made their careers, I should say, in the past, off of looking really, really good. And I've known some of these women in Vegas, and they're very, very beautiful, and a lot of them have breast enhancement and that sort of stuff going on. And that's what they use to perform well at their job. It's about looking good and providing I don't know, that aesthetic value to someone. Is it wrong for them to do it? A lot of people would say yeah, but I would say no. If it gives you benefit and it's your body, you can do whatever you want to it. Some people think it's deceptive. I think because it's a known quantity, it's not deceptive. And that goes back to like if we made steroids just out in the open, they're legal and we have our competitions. They're just available. You can just use steroids now in your professional competitions. You can use them in the Olympics. We'd have a lot less issues. We wouldn't be so upset when Lance Armstrong turned out he used GH just like everybody else used GH. We would be like, okay, well, Lance Armstrong clearly had the best training routine and he had the best genetics. And by the way, genetics is a weird one too. It's like we're okay with people having the best genetics, but we're not okay with them using drugs to enhance their performance. Like, only if they get the luck of the genetic lottery and they're Shaquille O'Neal and 7 feet tall is it okay to have a specific and insane advantage over other people, right? The genetic freaks have the advantage, but other people shouldn't. I don't know where the consistency is there. I'm okay with other people deciding how they're going to do it. But we you know, if everything was out in the open, Lance Armstrong would train and you would see, okay, well, he won because he had the best training regimen. He had the best strategy for the competition. You know, he had the best bicycle, maybe. You'd have a lot more factors. You'd have a lot less factors to consider. You wouldn't have to consider the factor of the unknown of, like, I wonder if he was taking any drugs to be so insanely good. Right? That just wouldn't be part of it. So I would be a fan if they just kind of made everything more out in the open for everyone. And by the way, if you guys like my teeth, these top teeth are actually fake. I actually had an issue where my top teeth were ground down, and I had terrible self-esteem issues because my teeth looked bad. So I had I had veneers done on the top. So I've had cosmetic surgery. Turned out that didn't really fix my self-esteem problem, but losing 70 pounds really did help with my self-esteem problem. But through the process of losing the 70 pounds, it wasn't actually being thin and fit. It was really just coming to terms with correct expectations about my life and having a deep understanding of really who I was and what value I give to other people that improve my self-esteem, just as a by the way. So to sum it up with steroids, I said the primary side effect of steroids is greatness. And that's really, that's the reality for most people that are involved in competition with performance enhancing drugs of any kind, whether they're stimulants or it's doping or it's using anabolic steroids or estrogen blockers or some other substance that's going to give you an edge. That's how people are going to view it. And I don't think it's likely to change. I don't know if there's ever going to be this point where, like, tests are so good and everybody else has run out of chemical ideas that there won't be this, like, competition between how well can we test the athletes and how well can I design a substance to get around the test. It might be better if everything was out in the open. And the last thing really is that I mentioned correct expectations in the beginning. People, because of professional athletes, their performance and what they say about what they do, their unwillingness to talk about what performance-enhancing drugs they use out of some very, very rare people in some very specific circles. You have professional bodybuilders like Phil Heath that won't admit that they use steroids, and there's no way that they don't use steroids, and any sane person understands that. But they won't say it because it's bad for business, and it's, you could maybe you get arrested for having steroids or something, but it's bad for business. And it's because we have this like crazy, Americans have this crazy, and I don't think it's just Americans, I think it's lots of people have this crazy idea that that hard work will give you, like, the athletic victory. And that's not real. And it's not real in lots of things. You need to have the correct expectations. You cannot work hard and have an iron diet and then look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And the reason is because Arnold Schwarzenegger worked really hard. He had that iron tight diet. And he took steroids, and he's a genetic freak. So he had everything going for him to look as amazing as he did in the 70s. And there's dudes who are, like, way more muscular than him now. So, no, you're not going to look like Phil Heath with hard work. You're going to look like Phil Heath if you work really hard, have his good genetics, and you're using a massive amount of steroids to achieve a body that nature would deem completely unfit for reproduction and for survival, right? That's an important thing. Another thing that just came to mind as I'm talking about this is synthol. So synthol, this is a bodybuilding specific thing. So synthol is a site enhancement oil, and it's something bodybuilders use. And sometimes you'll see it every now and again in a news story and usually it's like by newscasters who have no idea what this is, and they're just saying, like, here's this guy with massive muscles, and anyone who knows knows this person has pumped themselves full of mineral oil or some other substance, some kind of oil, vegetable oil in some cases, to try to get, like, this really, like, puffed up muscle that looks bizarre and weird. So synthol is something that bodybuilders actually do use. A lot of bodybuilders use it. I don't know how many use, but I think a lot of them use it, at least for like problem body parts, a site enhancement oil. What it is, it's an oil that they stick a needle into their muscles and they inject it in, and over time it kind of blows up the muscle and it stretches stretches the muscle so it can be a little bit bigger and builds up scar tissue and makes the muscle appear bigger without actually gaining any more muscle mass, right? Without gaining like extra ribbons of muscle and without gaining any extra strength. So synthol is like this artificial substance that people use. And it's really weird is that in bodybuilding circles, synthol is like the most abhorrent thing ever. It's like, oh, this dude, he used synthol, I can't believe it. But they're okay somehow with anabolic steroids. Like there's some difference between the two. That it's like, oh, well, with the anabolic steroids, he built real muscle. It's like, did he? Because his like nature would never build that muscle. And it's like with synthol, he just injected it into his muscle to have bigger muscles. It's like they're both using an artificial substance to achieve a look. Not even, bodybuilding is not about strength. It's about how you look. So, to me, they're the same. That's just something there. All the enhancements, I view them as pretty similar. But let me finish this bit about expectations. If you're young and you see somebody who's a bodybuilder, do not expect to get that body without drugs. You need to have the correct expectations. So if you're somebody that doesn't want to use drugs, then you're somebody who needs to have fitness goals that are appropriate for somebody who's not going to use drugs. So looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger is not an appropriate goal, right? An appropriate goal is looking like, somebody who's really ripped, but it isn't huge, right? That could be an appropriate goal. Or somebody who's very strong, but isn't that big, might be strong for his size. Those are kind of appropriate goals. Another appropriate fitness goal is like, I want to run a marathon, right? I want to train and run a marathon. That's a really, really big deal. I want to run an Ironman. Like that's a huge, huge goal. And I've known people who've competed in Ironman World Championships and don't use drugs. Now, do I think that people in Ironman World Championships use drugs? I think some of them do, obviously, but the endurance type stuff, you're able to at least complete the race and have that goal of like, I did an Ironman, I did a 16-hour race and it was like insane. You can have that goal and you don't have to use drugs to get there. That's for sure, because I've known people who've done it. You need to have those appropriate goals. Inappropriate goals are going to be those ones that it's like, I'm going to hit more home runs than Barry Bonds and I'm going to do it all natty. It's like, no, you're not. Trust me, you're not. And everyone loves to see those balls go down into the water at Giant Stadium. But they don't like to know that the guy who hit it over the wall uses a bunch of testosterone and other kinds of substances, trenbolone, whatever, to knock it out of the park. People they don't want to hear about the drugs that people use. You need to have the correct expectations is the main thing. So if you're young, if you're pursuing a sport or you're thinking about fitness and your fitness goals, you need to align your goals with what is possible, with what you're willing to do. And I will not judge somebody if they want to use steroids to achieve a body, to achieve whatever body they want or achieve whatever fitness goal they want. However, you need to go into that with both eyes open. There is no free ride in this life. Using steroids has definite health consequences. Seems like every time I look something up, there's another bodybuilder from like the 80s or 90s who's died early because of an enlarged heart or failed kidneys or something else like that. Diuretics are another thing that bodybuilders use with competition to like flush out their water and make them look extra lean, and that could be very damaging for your kidneys. Or people who die of liver failure, all this sorts of stuff. These are real consequences to using this. There is no free ride. I think a lot of people think that steroids are more dangerous than they are, but steroids are not without harms, right? They're not like a free ride. There is no free ride. And that's what people really think steroids are. They think they're a free ride. Like, you're going to take the steroids and sit around and look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's like, no. You take the steroids, you train twice as hard as a natty, and you look twice as big. That's the way steroids work, because they increase your recovery, and as well as like your focus and things like that. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. I know that's long and rambling, but I appreciate you watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And my book's linked down below. Everything that's important is linked down below. I really appreciate you watching, and I hope you have a great, great day.